Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Waffle Flower Crafts. In today's technique video, I'll be creating striped sentiment strips. I'll be using these Waffle Flower products today. First up is the new Cold Hands stamp set. Really cute set. I'll be using these two little trees up there. I'll also be using the Pinking Layers die set. And this awesome die set, this is called Holiday Words, creates these awesome sentiment strips. And then the Paper Cut Alpha die set as well. Okay, so I've already went ahead and cut some 1/4-inch strips from some colored cardstock. I picked greens and reds, and I cut them 1/4 inch because I knew I wanted to use 4, and the length of my letters from the alphabet, or from the Paper Cut Alpha die set, is about 1 inch, and when these 1/4 inch all kind of get together, they're a little bit bigger, and that'll make sure I don't have pieces of a sentiment strip to adhere to my cardstock, but one actual strip. I'm going to adhere them down to a 5.5 by 1.25 inch strip of white cardstock. It's only 65 pound cardstock, so it's a little bit lighter weight because we'll be adding more thickness by adhering these colored strips of cardstock on here. I'm just using a liquid adhesive. This is just Mod Podge adhesive in a Quiller's adhesive bottle or application bottle, so it has a nice fine tip. And I happen to get this on Amazon, but you can find it lots of places, this little bottle. It's really been a lifesaver, and I had a question last week about the Mod Podge being as strong as Multimedia Matte, and it is. I found it to be just as strong, and I actually like it better because it's more liquid. I found the Multimedia Matte too pasty for my taste, but that's just my personal preference. I like how liquid this is, and it kind of comes out in one nice long stream, which is what I'm doing, just kind of squeezing a long line of adhesive and then just butting these strips right up against each other, so there's no gap, no whiteness, except for at the very top, which I will trim that down because this white strip of cardstock is also a scrap. So now that I've got my two colored strips, I'm ready to trim them down, which I did. I already went and trimmed them down, and now I'm ready to start die cutting with the alphabet dies. So I chose to use alphabet dies today because it's a little bit different, but it also will give me basically a 2-for-1. I'll cut these, and then I'll be able to use the die cut, the negative, the strip, and then the actual letters. I'll use that for another card. So I'll make 2 cards with one kind of technique. So I'm just positioning these letters out now. I am using a T in place of an L, just because the T is about the same thickness, or width I should say, of the L, and this is just making it easier for me to kind of position so I get the same space between each letter, because obviously I only have one L, so to make Holly I have to run everything through except for that T, and then I'll pull all the letters off, and then I'll run that L one more time. So that T is just serving as a space holder to help me position the die cuts that I can cut this first round. And I also do this little tip for when I'm stamping as well. I'll pick a letter with an alphabet stamp set. I'll pick a letter to kind of serve as a placeholder while I construct my sentiment. So that's a handy little trick. So I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine, and then I will pull this off. And I'm just using washi tape today, which is a little sticky, but we make it work. It's a little stickier for some reason than my painter's tape, which is what I normally use. And I'm pulling these off here. I do kind of pull a little tape of the paper off a little bit, which I'll show you my little trick for kind of fixing that. When you pull off a tape that you use to hold your die down, and you kind of end up ripping a little bit of the surface of your paper, I'll show you a little trick you can do with that later, how to fix that. Okay, so I'm just going to pop out the letters out of these dies, especially that L, because I got to use that one right away. Center it here between the L and the Y, and then use the washi tape to hold down, and then run it through my die cutting machine. So now I've got Holly. On the second sentiment strip, I'm going to do Jolly. So this is going to be a Christmas card. Now make sure you want to save those letters. So that's my negative strip, or the strip that has the negatives cut out. But I definitely want to save those letters that I cut out with the alphabet dies. So now I'm doing the exact same thing, just using a J instead of an H here for jolly. And now you can see I pulled up a little of that green strip. So I used and it was really fast, but I did use a Tombow mono eraser. And it's the one that you use for ink when you have ink smears. It's kind of like almost like a sandpaper, and I just rubbed it over that place where I kind of pulled up a little bit of the paper, and because the paper is colored all the way through, it just kind of smoothed it out and you wouldn't have known that I tore the paper at all. So that's a handy little trick in case you tear your paper sometimes when you pull off your adhesive or your tape when you run it through the die cutting machine. Okay, so now I'm showing you my A2 card base that I used an embossing folder. This is a next level embossing folder. I used that to create some texture on the background. I've already taken the sentiment strips that I cut earlier, and I've added some foam tape to the back of them, and I've already peeled the backs off, so I'm going to stick them right down onto the card. I'm going to have one kind of butt up against the right side of the card and the other sentiment strip butt up right against the left side of the card, just to create a nice flow to the card. So I'm just going to stick that down, make sure it's nice and straight. I think I have to pull it up just a second here. Fix that a little, tweak that a little bit. I think I got a little off. And then I'm going to add one more element to this card. So remember I showed you those holiday word sentiment strips earlier, those dies? Well, I used the Merry Christmas die and cut out of mirrored gold cardstock Merry Christmas, but I didn't bother cutting off all of Merry or worry about it having all of Merry, because I'm going to trim off the word Merry and just keep Christmas. I'm going to round the corners just a tad with my scissors, just to kind of help it mimic the look of something when it's die cut. So now I've got Christmas, and I've already went ahead and cut the same thing out of craft foam, out of white craft foam. So now I'm going to adhere the gold mirrored cardstock Christmas on top of the craft foam Christmas. And again, I'm using the Mod Podge just because this has got such fine little areas that I want to get adhesive, so I definitely want to use something with that fine tip to get that adhesive where I want it. And now I'm just kind of squeezing the sides lightly with my fingers just to make sure everything's lined up properly. The foam, craft foam, Christmas, and the cardstock Christmas are nice and lined up. Put more adhesive on the back, and now I'm adhering it right under Jolly. So it says Holly Jolly Christmas. So that was a nice finishing touch, adding that really mirrored gold as a nice different texture to that. So now I'm going to create a second card. So this is going to be the card for the die cut letters. I'm going to stamp with Distress Oxides. This is Cracked Pistachio, one of the trees from the Cold Hand stamp set. So I'm just repeatedly stamping that in the background. Now I'm going to use Twisted Citron, and I'm going to stamp the same tree several times in this other green color. These are just colors that match the colored cardstocks that I used for the striped paper that I created. And this is Worn Lipstick. So I'm taking the second tree now, and I'm just stamping it with the Worn Lipstick. And then I will stamp it one more time, or several more times, in one more color, which is the Candied Apple. So a nice red, really pretty Christmas red. So this creates a really simple but pretty background that really, I think, works really well for that holly jolly sentiment that we created with the paper cut alpha. Just filling in a couple of the blank spots here, and that background is all done. I'll hold it up to the camera here so you can see. Oh, I'm going to stamp one more, and I'll hold it up here to the camera so you can see that pretty background. So that's all done. Now I'm going to move on to completing my sentiment. So I've already cut a panel with the Pinking Layers die out of vellum, and now I'm going to adhere these letters that I cut earlier with the Mod Podge again. And I'm going to kind of skip through this here because there's nothing fancy. I'm just putting in little drops of the adhesive right on the back side of the letters, and then sticking those letters down. So I'm going to jump ahead to the last letter here, the Y in jolly, and just going to stick that down. And you also, to do this, and then I'm going to take that Christmas that I cut before, and I'm going to adhere that down onto the vellum as well. And you don't have to use strips of paper to make your sentiment, your stripy strips. You could also stamp with a strip stamp and create your stripy sentiment with that, and then die cut out of that. So you can also use stamps as well. You don't have to use strips of colored cardstock. But I have so many scraps. This is a nice way to use a little bit of those scraps. So I went ahead and die cut a second vellum panel with the pinking layers die, and I'm now going to layer those two together because one layer of the vellum I found was still too see-through, not quite thick enough, and you still had a hard time reading the letters. So I'm doubling up the vellum here so you can see those letters a little bit better. They're a little bit clearer and easier to read. You can distinguish them better from the background, I should say. So I'm just putting the adhesive right behind the letters, then adhering the second vellum layer to that, and then putting some more adhesive behind the letters. And now I'm going to adhere these two panels, these backed up panels, onto the card base. And that is done. So pretty simple, but a really fun card. I think a really festive Christmas card. And here's the first card we made with the striped sentiment strips. So a fun technique that you can kind of create two cards or challenge yourself to create two cards with. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you want any more information on the products I used, please visit waffleflower.com, and you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for more creative ideas. Thanks for watching.